Dr. Sharma, in the Abrahamic religions, God is typically portrayed as omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. And I was wondering if that is also how God is characterized.
That is true of Hinduism.
In Hinduism.
One's first impulse is to say yes. And I won't be surprised, given the range of Hinduism, that there are schools within Hinduism, especially schools of Hindu theism, which might maintain exactly that. But the interesting thing here is that in mainstream Hinduism, you find examples where God's omnipotence, certainly in God's role as an incarnation, doesn't quite turn out to be what one would expect. Let me explain. Let me try to explain this with bringing in karma. Because of his strong commitment, I presume actually, that because of the strong commitment to the idea of karma in Hinduism, God's omnipotence has at times to be recalibrated or even stayed, kept in abeyance, or whatever might be the right word for it. Because if you allowed for that, then the karma doctrine would be compromised. Now, in fact, there are hymns in South Indian literature which in a prayer to God, that please do this, and if somebody says that this is the result of your karma, then whom are we fooling? Have you not yourself set this law in place? The lawmaker can dispense with the law. So, in an important way, very early, this tension between karma and God's grace, God's activities, comes to be perceived in the tradition. A remarkable example of this happens in the Mahabharata. In that epic, Krishna plays a major role. And Krishna is perceived as an incarnation of Vishnu. There are hints of this in the epic itself and clearly afterwards. Now, in the epic, there are 3 occasions on which Krishna displays what has been called his cosmic form. He appears like an ordinary human being, but at 3 places he gives a glimpse of his divinity. The first time this happens is when he goes as an ambassador to the court of King Duryodhana with a peace proposal. And Duryodhana, against all rules and conventions, which emphasize the inviolable character of the ambassador, imprisons him. So he breaks loose from that, showing his cosmic form. This is interesting that he has intervened in things of the world and to free himself. So you might see this as a reading of his omnipotence. The second time he does it is in the Bhagavad Gita, when he reveals his form to Arjuna, who asks for such a vision. But the third time it happens is very interesting. It's after the war, and he's going back to his kingdom, and en route to the kingdom, he stays with a sage who believes that Krishna is an incarnation. So the sage asks him, I heard a rumor about this, some dust-up between two sides of the royal family, and I hope you took care of it when you were there. And Krishna says, no, it snowballed into a major fratricidal struggle. So he was shocked. He said, and you as the incarnation of God couldn't stop it? So at that point, Krishna argues that sometimes the role of an incarnation is what is called damage control, in our language. Yeah? And he's still very upset. So when Krishna leaves him, he again shows his cosmic form. That is, reconfirming his incarnational status. So obviously, the sage did not feel that Krishna had been effective, not omnipotent. And Krishna's answer seems to imply that there are certain karmas which have to work themselves out. I don't quite know how to take it, but it's clear that he is not omnipotent in the sense we might take him to be. Now, of course, the same question could be asked of Jesus. Why could he not save himself? He was an incarnation of God. Of course, for a Christian, this is a wrong question to ask. Because the whole purpose of Jesus' life was to be crucified and then be resurrected. Because the purpose was to save the world through his death. So the Christian example may not be seen as compromising, or Jesus' example rather, may not be seen as compromising God's omnipotence, because there's God's purpose behind it. But the tradition does not, hold this against the omnipotence of God for that very reason. There's another interesting sequel to the Krishna story. After the end of the war, a queen who lost all her sons in this battle accuses Krishna of not stopping the war, even though he could have done so, and curses him that his entire family will be destroyed, just as hers was. And according to the epic, it happens. So now, two interesting points emerge. One is some kind of a hint that when you enter the Hindu world, the Hindu vision of the world, the karmic constraints keep being effective or keep coming up as a check to the omnipotence of God. But the second point, in which we might make sense of the limitation of God when he tries to enter his own creation, would be an interesting point to investigate. If we use our old example of the novel and God being a novelist, or a better example of a God, okay, both seem to work, so let's take both. First we'll take the novel example. So God is a novelist, and the universe as we see unfolding is a novel, and he decides to enter the framework of the novel. The moment he decides to do that, he will have to do it as a character in the novel. The moment The novelist does that, and he need not be God. Even an ordinary novelist, if he enters his own book, right, will have to do it as a character and will be bound by the personality of the character. He cannot, in the novel, do whatever he pleases. Although, as the author of the novel, he can, once looking at the novel as a whole. So there is something structural in entering your own creation. The other example is from a playwright. Suppose Shakespeare wants to act a role. Shakespeare has written the whole play. Shakespeare can change the whole play. But once he is in it as a character, which he has himself drawn, he is bound by it, although he is the author. So there might be more general theological considerations also at work.